Hi, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first panel session for day 2 of the Greenlight Climate Festival. If I can just ask our panelists to please turn on their cameras, if you can. So just to introduce myself, my name is Chloe Mueller, and I'll be your moderator for this panel today. I'm a junior at Hunter College, double majoring in environmental studies and economics, and I'm an aspiring environmental lawyer. I'm so grateful to be here with you guys today to speak about sustainability and climate in business. So for our audience, this session will explore climate entrepreneurship and how people can identify business opportunities when combating climate change and addressing sustainability. I'm joined by some amazing leaders in the space, including Garry Cooper, the founder and CEO of Rheaply, Faye Ann Lawrence, the founder and CEO of Sologistics, Christina Almeida, the founder and CEO of Pildora, Chante Harris, the founder of the Women of Color Collective in Sustainability, and Sandra Noonan, the Chief Sustainability Officer for Just Salad. We have a packed panel today, so why don't we dive right in? I'd like to ask each of you to introduce yourself and briefly talk about your work. Maybe we can start with you, Sandra.
Hi, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. I lead sustainability at Just Salad. We're a restaurant chain whose mission is to make everyday health and everyday sustainability possible. So environmental sustainability is front and center in our mission. What that means is several things, but two very important priorities for us are waste reduction and food and climate. So we are the world's, we run the world's largest restaurant reusable bowl program. So in the background, you see our signature reusable bowls. So we are a champion for the circular economy and are trying to transform the fast casual industry to enable people to eat without trash. We believe that eating should be decoupled from single-use waste. Our program has run for 15 years and we're now expanding it to delivery. We also became the first US restaurant chain to carbon label our menu last year during Climate Week. We really want to help our customers understand that the foods we eat have an impact on the world's climate. So we have several other initiatives, but I'll stop there and give it to our next panelist.
Great. Maybe Fayeann, would you like to speak?
Sure. Good morning. And this is a great panel. I'm excited to speak with you all. My name is Faye Ann Lawrence, and I am a solar energy project management expert and an entrepreneur. I'm the CEO of Sologistics, and Sologistics is a minority and woman-owned business enterprise certified expediting firm I founded to provide guidance to installers and developers in New York State on permitting, design, interconnection, all the things necessary to properly install solar arrays. I also serve as a board member for the New York State Energy Industry Association, or NYSEA, and that's an organization that advocates for the sustainable growth of solar energy across New York State. Within NYSEA, I serve on the JEDI Committee, Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And I'm very active in advancing renewable energy and sustainability internationally, particularly in my native Trinidad and Tobago and in the island of Grenada, where I reside. Here I consult on energy policy, sustainable land management and governance, and most importantly to this conversation, I think, establishing a renewables academy to train the youth on the technologies to make sure that they have the ability to get into the field and advance in the field. Good, and that's it for now. Sure, we'll have a lot more to talk about as we go along.
Yeah, for sure. Garry, would you like to share?
Sure. Good morning, all. It's a pleasure to be on this panel. So I'm Garry Cooper. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Rheaply. I come to you full of allergies this morning and from Chicago. I do a couple other things. So I'm also a board member of a couple civic nonprofit organizations in Chicago, one chaired by Penny Pritzker called P33, which is helping to diversify and increase innovation in kind of founders of color in Chicago. and then 1871, which is the largest tech accelerator in North America. And in my spare time, I write a lot about circular economy, hence our business, and ways that we don't have to make a choice between a sustainable future and our economic growth and economic equality. Rheaply, the company that I founded 5 or so years ago, is a tech company that helps large organizations from Google to MIT to Yale scale reuse. So we help organizations with material reuse, material flow through kind of a really cool technology package. So pleasure to talk about sustainability, circular economy, and all things in between.
That sounds great. I also know you worked on a Parkinson's drug when I was looking at you. It was awesome.
Yes.
Sounds really cool.
Yes.
Chante, would you like to share?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm also having some sore throat issues. I've been facilitating hours of office hours for founders and judges this week for our global challenge, but really excited to be here. I wear a few different hats as well. It sounds like the panelists here have a few different jobs, but I work right now with a climate tech venture studio and accelerator called Venture for Climate Tech. We help founders go from idea to prototype. We just wrapped up our application, which was a global application and received over 700 applications across the globe from over 63 countries. So I have not been sleeping for the past few weeks, but it's been amazing to see the amount of ideas and all of the focus on climate innovation and tech at the moment. I also am a venture partner with Republic and NextGen. I care deeply about diversifying not only founders' cap tables, but thinking about how can we get them different types of funding that aren't always equity focused. And so that's where I come from in thinking about climate innovation and tech. And then you also mentioned that I'm an entrepreneur myself. I founded Women of Color Collective and Sustainability, which really is the first global collective supporting women of color and amplifying their work in sustainability. And the goal there was really how do we make sure that more faces that are diverse are at events like these, have opportunities to excel in their careers and really receive the resources. In terms of CUNY, just thinking about what students might want to hear, we're working on a mentorship program. Most of our women of color involved in our collective are either mid-career or senior level. And so really excited about potential memberships that we'll be pushing out soon and figuring out how can we support the next, the next phase of leaders in this industry. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds awesome. Attendees, listen up. And certainly last but not least, Christina.
Hello, everyone. I am Christina Almeida. Thank you so much for having me. I feel so excited to be here today and talk on this amazing panelist of impactful people. Yeah, thanks so much for that. And I am the founder of Pildora, a sustainable curated shop for health, beauty, and self-care. And we also sell a little bit of fashion, but we're really focused on the wellness space. And my mission with Pildora is really to build a community for self-care and sustainability, to create a space where people can find great quality products that don't endanger the future of our planet. And really through this space, I want to continue to create a space where we also create great content that provides education to people all around the world, that can continue to empower through knowledge. One of my first missions when I started Pildora was to sort of eliminate the stigma around sustainability. So I think we need to make it more approachable, more kind of like entertaining. And so kind of educating while we entertain is one of my first missions. I am also originally from Mexico, so I'm a Mexican American. And so one of my other causes that I'm involved with is supporting a cause, an organization called Vida Digna, which supports indigenous communities in Mexico. And we are also aligning with some other causes through Pildora, which I will soon be announcing, which I'm really excited about. So our space really is also for empowering women and particularly Latinas, and just kind of showing that when you come together with a positive cause, that anything is possible. So again, I'm really happy to be here and to speak on this panel. So thank you for having me.
Great. Yeah, I also saw that Christina launched Pildora now in the midst of a pandemic. So like hats off to you. That seems almost impossible. So kind of our first question that I think would be interesting to speak about is most funding for startups, including climate startups, goes to companies founded by white cisgender men. It would seem that there are more challenges in being a climate entrepreneur if you're a woman or a member of the BIPOC community. Has this been a challenge for you, and how do you respond to these challenges? Um, Maybe I see Gary's nodding his head. Maybe you'd like to start.
I'm happy to start, but so many other women, I want to give all the other women the first chance. But I have so many opinions about this question. For sure, the venture, if we're talking about the venture community, the numbers are disgraceful, quite frankly, when it comes to whether you're talking about climate funding or just funding in general for people of color, whether they be women or men. And it's an issue that I faced as a founder when we started. I have some advantages. I went to a very great school. I have a PhD, and even for me, it took 11 months to raise my first $150,000 for an idea operating in a market of 4.5 trillion. So the I can't imagine what it is for someone who doesn't have my network or who doesn't have a PhD, who didn't went to the schools that I went to. So I have many things to say. There's so many other brilliant people on the panel, but one of the things that I have been doing is with a couple of the founders, we started a fund in Chicago to exactly get at this issue called longjump.vc, where we're helping fund under-networked and underrepresented founders first check fund. So I'm doing that also on the side of kind of scaling Rheaply. But I think the magic bullet for me has just been to be passionate, really, and just to not give up. I really don't know of another framework of fighting the wars in venture other than to stay on your mission, stay on your vision, be passionate, and just keep going. But maybe some others have a better bag of tricks that they've been able to levy.
Sure, I'll jump in here. Yeah, everything that Garry just said. I think a lot about my role as being a solution to this. So through our program, founders can access up to 125K of non-dilutive funding, which is provided through the New York State Energy Research Development Agency. We also are building out an investor network. I think what's really important for climate entrepreneurs, and I'm coming from a standpoint of thinking about climate and urban tech, which is oftentimes very capital intensive. I think even more white, male, cisgendered. And so before I joined the Venture for Climate Tech team, I was actually scaling early growth stage companies in New York and helping them think about pilot projects, design challenges, procurement opportunities. How do you scale through strategic partnerships and corporate partnerships? And I realized, honestly, after doing that for several years, how much all of the founders were not diverse, not only when it came to gender, but I think also ethnicity and race. And so I started to ask the question, how can we get more founders who look like myself in this space? And really a big part of that to me looks like thinking about all of the pools of funding that are out there. A lot of times there are really big grants or programs that aren't necessarily accessible because I always joke that government dishes out a lot of money for R&D and pilot projects, but is terrible at marketing themselves. And so most people don't know about them. They don't know that they can go find seed grants and be a part of these processes. And they're not necessarily easy processes. So I don't want to act like that's the silver bullet, but I do think it's a part of the equation. I mentioned I'm a venture partner as well with Republic, which is a crowd equity investing platform. I met their team about 4.5 years ago, a little bit after they launched, and became obsessed because if you looked at their statistics, the founders who were raising were a lot more diverse. And I think when we talk about investment and funding and venture, it's really about diversifying the people who are giving out the funding. And so I think you're seeing a big move for that now when it comes to those who are running funds, how we're talking about the theses for funds. And my team and I are actually raising a $50 million climate tech fund right now, focused on Canada and the US. And everything that we do on the Second East side of things and Second East Capital is how do we build economies of the future that really think about inclusivity and equity, and not just from an impact standpoint, which I think moves a lot of people, but also from an actual, I think to Garry's point, right, it was $1 trillion industry and he was still struggling to get capital. Like, we know that these founders, we know that these innovators know their market, they're able to scale. They just oftentimes have to deal with, I think, an industry that wants to give them a lot of coaching and not a lot of funding. And so we like to do both. And so that's why we have both programs and funding arms that fund diverse founders. And so I think there's a role for everyone to play when it comes to thinking about funding sources, as well as how do we support founders through both non-dilutive capital and again, for climate tech in particular, like if you look at some of these founders, they're not able to get to their Series A until 7 years in. And so when we talk about a traditional investment, a lot of folks are looking for things to happen way faster than that. And so I think it's also about moving the needle on how we talk about these technologies, especially because they're having an impact on people and planet, you know, and literally saving the economies, the future of how we exist on this earth.
I'll jump in at this point. First of all, I want to say to Garry, at some point he mentioned early on something about free time, and I can't imagine where that is coming from. It's got to be that one of his businesses is also manufacturing free time. But in terms of funding, yes, I agree that it's generally hard to come by as a startup, as I'm sure we're all aware. Our society is not one where traditional lenders will take a chance on your business idea without a surety of repayment or profit, unless you're connected. My experience, certainly, yes, white cis males have traditionally had easier access to startup funding than other demographics. But in my experience, what I really came up against was how much of the assistance, funding programs that were available are set aside specifically for tech, not necessarily even sustainable tech, but tech companies. So if you think of the Startup New York program, and for the students on the call, that's certainly something that you should make a note of and look up afterwards. The Startup New York program, there are a number of benefits for it, but one of the major ones is that it helps with office space, which can be quite expensive, more so in New York than most other states. And you generally, as a startup, don't have that initial funding for something like that. And yet so much of it is set aside for tech companies to the detriment of sustainability enterprises or women-owned enterprises or minority-owned enterprises. It's got to be tech related. So if you're not in tech, you essentially are disqualified from it. Another boost that my company got early on was the matching system that Kiva has, so kiva.org, I believe. And at the time, I don't know if this is still the case, what they do is you get your family and friends to donate, I think, a minimum of $25 to however much they want. And then Kiva matches that amount. And it gives you just enough to get started, depending on what you're getting started in. And that gave us a little runway to then work on getting our first client, get that first invoice out. So every little helps, you will find. And Kiva and Startup New York are certainly two places to start looking. But I hope that New York City, New York State, especially start to pay greater attention to that justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in funding as well.
Wow. I mean, I'm blown away, and these resources are definitely helpful to speak about. Christina, maybe you want to jump in?
Yeah, so I haven't necessarily gone through a full round of traditional funding yet. I originally have launched through bootstrapping, and then a round of friends and family, and so like Garry, I feel like very fortunate to have a network and people who believed in me, and to not have also it really, I think, depends on what your industry is and how much money you need to actually launch and to start. Some startups need a lot more money than others, but at times I have been approached by certain investors, and I think what's important, I guess, to think about when you're looking at investors, for me, and I've always thought about, I think I am going to be preparing to go through a round, and is that I would like to have more than an investor is a mentor as well, and have somebody that I could really learn from. And I have actually been going through a program that has been sort of helping me, so more of like a coaching program, which is what I felt that I needed. And so I think that there's so many platforms and networks out right now. Like I've been really, really crazy on Clubhouse lately. I don't know if everybody else is active on there right now, but I feel like that is a great space right now to be connected with so many amazing people. There's VCs on there. There's just other amazing, impactful people on there. So also there's a bunch of people on there that are, also not who you need to be talking to, but you can weed out the bad and talk to the good. But like Clubhouse, I think there's, amazing platforms where you can find great community, and then where you could find great programs where you can figure out exactly what it is that you need, where you might realize maybe I'm actually not ready for funding. Because I think that's another important point, because if you're not really ready for funding, you might actually get money and spend that money in the wrong way, which is what I felt that would happen for me, is that perhaps I wasn't exactly ready for a big round of funding, because I wasn't even exactly sure where I would, use that money. So figuring out and having a strategy, I think, before you actually get that round of funding, I think is really important. And as a woman and as a Latina woman, I think that there is actually a lot more opportunities now and resources, and programs and allocations for women that are sprouting up. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much all I can offer to this conversation.
No, that's more than enough. Sandra?
I'm not a founder, so I encourage the students in this group to really heed the advice of these, my fellow panelists. But what I will say is that in the circular economy space, I'm really inspired by several female founders, and these women are worth looking up. At the very least, understanding their stories. 3 of them are Lindsay Hull of Dispatch Goods out in San Francisco, pioneering circular solutions for restaurants. Zuleika Strasner, she's CEO of Zero Grocery, also out of California, woman of color who has raised a lot of funding for a zero waste grocery store concept. And Lauren Singer, CEO of Package Free. So just offering a few examples of women who are really leading the way in circularity, and that's very inspiring.
Great. I think this is like a super relevant question and topic for CUNY students. We are we are like a bunch of public colleges, and so we tend to have more students of color and students who are more disadvantaged than other schools. And so this is definitely relevant. I'd like to move on to our next question though. So some in the private sector claim that you have to compromise in order to make businesses sustainable. Do you agree with this statement? Why or why not? Chante?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think the use of compromise is interesting. I mean, I think, so this is me putting on I study economics in undergrad. And so I think of everything as opportunity cost, right? For every opportunity that is out there, there's a cost. And so, and vice versa, right? And so having worked with corporations, very big corporations on scaling in a new market, and then also having worked with growth stage companies who have now went on to go public and are big companies at this point. I think I'd like to not frame it as compromise and more of like, what are short-term and long-term goals, right? And I think the reality is that there has to be both. I know there's a big conversation right now about greenwashing, which is a valid concern and also a real, I think, problem that is, I don't even want to say emerging. I think it's just going to continue to grow as companies start to I think partially really have to think about sustainability, but also become mandated to think about sustainability. For those, I know we're talking about New York, so I actually worked on my previous team on Local Law 97, which requires, big property owners in New York to now cut their emissions. And so there's a requirement, right? And so now they're really having to think about, what does it look like for me to retrofit my building, upgrade my building? I think it's made a bunch of opportunity for my good friend Donnell over at Block Power. I don't know if he's involved in this event, but he's incredible and you all should check him out. But yeah, I think that, ultimately there's a lot of things happening at once. And there was an article that came out, I think it either came out via Bloomberg or some other Business Insider, but it was talking about how if you look at most corporations that are now coming out with sustainability goals, they have no one on their board who has sustainability experience. And so I think as we talk about what it means for companies to push sustainability, but also not have the appropriate expertise to think about sustainability, I think what you get is maybe more social impact programs. And I've had a lot of conversations with corporates around this, right? And so that looks like external facing work that, we could probably talk forever about carbon offsets and what that looks like moving forward. I won't go into that, but I think ultimately it's how do we ensure that companies have the right expertise internally, that while they're thinking through their teams to push these sustainability efforts, there's also government and policy really playing the role of regulation, right? And of mandating companies to do better. And I think there's also a whole social component. I mean, I think about being in this space for several years now. I mean, 4 years ago when I was talking about sustainability, no one cared. There wasn't like this level of excitement. People certainly weren't screaming climate everywhere. And, now I think Christina mentioned Clubhouse. I go on Clubhouse all the time and there's a million people talking about climate in so many rooms. And I think it's personally super exciting for me. I think the question becomes is like, how do we actually all move the needle, right, in a real way? And so corporations, businesses, companies have to, I think, both think about these sort of external social impact oriented ways of thinking about how to build a more sustainable company, but they also need to externally address things like supply chain, right? And like, how are their actual products being made? What does it look like for them to get there? The reality is things don't happen in 1 week. And so we're talking about corporations that have existed for decades. And so they're not necessarily tomorrow going to switch over their supply chain. And I think what we need to be talking about is how do we ensure that we're thinking about a phased approach for companies, that we're mandating them to think about that. I think sometimes policy is like, hey, do this thing, and there's not really clear layout of how to get there. And that was actually what I was doing for the past 4 years, taking policy, taking all of the funding programs, mandates that were coming out of New York City and New York State, and then essentially creating ways for companies to meet those requirements or access those opportunities. So I hope that's answering your question. I think that everything requires a strategic phased approach. And I think that we have to both hold companies accountable, but also think about how can the next group of leaders really bring the expertise that I think is missing for a lot of these companies to get there.
Definitely answers my question. It's kind of interesting because I feel like you're just redefining what is a compromise. But it's funny that you mentioned Local Law 97 because this summer I interned for New York City Parks and Rec, and I created a guide on like what Local Law 97 will do for our city. So it's really great.
That's amazing. Can we check that out somewhere?
I'll send it to you.
Okay, sounds
Garry,
good.
maybe you want to speak about
To me, well, to all of us, please, if you will. It's right in our wheelhouse.
So, yeah, I'm happy to comment. I'm also interested in reading, even though I live in Chicago. I'm happy to read that as well. So our business is completely to the enterprise. So I talk with deputy mayors and leaders at Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Target, all these big corps all day long. And some of them are clients, so I hope they're not listening. But quite frankly, I think we're moving not as intentionally and not on pace with the problem that we're all trying to solve. I think to Chante's point, there was a point where like sustainability was definitely a marketing tool. I think it has moved into a threat to a business. Even if I put to the side the whole point that we only have one rock to live on, unless Elon figures something out that I don't know. And if you don't have a rock to live on, you don't have a market. So I'll put that to the side. but just the idea of recruiting the most talented people to businesses. They want to work at businesses that don't adversely impact the environment. When you think about the consumer behavior, think all the awesome brands that we already talked about here with food, people want to know that their impact in their consumer in their personal lives isn't impacting the environment unduly, especially if it's a brand that they support. And then third, the market returns just tell you the story. If you look at even in the fashion world, um, there are better returns for investors who invest in things like REI and Patagonia than their counterparts. So there's literally, and then the circular economy where I work in is a complete business case. It's all really about driving more financial return by being sustainable. So like if I'm a business leader leading a manufacturing company right now, I have to be heavily investing and heavily getting up to speed with how to make my business net zero over the next 10 years. If you don't, I just really don't understand how those businesses, quite frankly, survive the transition that has to take place. And I'm trying to be less meek in my tone, even though these are people who I serve, because I do think that there is a existential threat that is not imagined, that is real, and I think that we all should take it very, very seriously.
Yep, I'm gonna jump in next if you don't mind. So in the broader sense, sustainability and sustainable development is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the needs of the future, so that we have that intergenerational equity and we are hopefully leaving the world better for generations to come. So no, I don't agree with the statement that compromise is necessary, because I think we're past that point. As Chante said, there's too much at stake for us to still be using that false argument. The economic, the environmental, the social, and the political benefits all align behind sustainability. So greenwashing is not only disingenuous now, but it's dangerous. And for those of you students, I hope that you've Googled greenwashing by now if you didn't know it coming into it. But what it means is conveying the false impression that your company's products are environmentally sound and made in an environmentally conscious way. And I think that's, yes, it's disingenuous, but it's dangerous to be doing that now. And then, as Garry said, both consumers and employees are consciously choosing to work for and with companies that are value-based and that include sustainability considerations in their operations. So at this point, doing the right thing is the only choice, is the only sensible choice for working with companies, working for companies, starting your own company.
I completely agree, honestly. Christina, I think Garry mentioned fashion, so maybe you want to speak about that too.
Yeah, I was thinking about everything everyone said. I think that compromise, depends on how some people look at it, but in reality, I think it really thinks about how you think. If you're really like a short-term thinker versus a long-term thinker, with every business decision, you're looking at if what kind of company really you're trying to run. Is it, as you said, is it a value-based company? And with most do good, impactful businesses, we are value-based companies. And so you have to kind of deliver that message and make people understand that maybe this is not going to give you a return tomorrow, but in the long term, you will actually make a greater return on your investment. But sometimes it's really hard to make a bigger company see that or want to accept that. But I think also for a company that has been sustainable from the start since it was founded, it's also easier than a company that is a really large corporation and then trying to implement sustainability into their ethos as well. So those are two different use cases as well. So those are just two things I was thinking, but I really think that some ways that I guess somebody could look at compromises having to be made that we've faced in our business has just been you see a brand that potentially is very exciting to bring onto the store, but then it really doesn't technically fit into what we consider up to par with our sustainability standards. And so while somewhere inside of you are like, oh, well, maybe but it could look so nice in the store. And then, you obviously it's where you have to ask yourself that question, which is, what is more important? Do you want that to look, it's popular, it's got a lot of followers or whatever, and you want on the store? Or are we really 100% committed to our values? So what kind of business are we trying to run, and what's more important at the end of the day? It's the future of this planet, and really a genuine experience through your business, and how you're going to slowly build a trusted experience and following over the next 10 years, versus all of a sudden get something popping up tomorrow. So to me, it's really looking at a long-term experience versus a short-term gain.
I will say that I completely, utterly reject the notion that sustainability is a compromise. Not embracing sustainability is a compromise. And I can give you 3 examples from Just Salad's experience that illustrate why sustainability is, if anything, a value add. We offer, let me start with our reusable bowl program. Since day 1, we have offered a free salad topping like avocado to anyone who comes in with a reusable bowl, and helps us save 75,000 pounds of plastic from going to landfills every year. We're spending money on that free topping that we could have had if we hadn't given it for free. But what are we getting? We're getting at least 2 things. We're getting the loyalty of a customer who keeps coming back for that free topping and extending the customer lifetime value. We are also saving money on disposable containers. Those cost us a lot of money. It costs a lot of money to stock disposable packaging. And of course, third, we're getting the satisfaction of going home every day and knowing that we did not add to the environmental damage of modern commerce. So that's one example. Another example is food waste. Food waste costs restaurants a ton of money. We are partnering with Too Good To Go, which is a food surplus app where consumers can rescue perfectly good restaurant food at the end of the day that otherwise we'd have to throw out due to regulation. How is it a compromise for Just Salad to minimize its food waste? If anything, that's fantastic for us. We're selling through Too Good To Go a salad that normally costs $12. We sell it for $3.99. We're still capturing some value rather than throwing it in the garbage or the compost. Third example and last example, we are investing in energy efficiency at our stores and reducing our energy use by up to 25% in some cases. How is that a compromise? The only thing it's getting your colleagues and your stakeholders to agree that this is worth the time and effort. And it often is a lot of time and effort, but it's not a compromise, it's a value add. And if you're still struggling with this question, I would just encourage you to immediately go read the book, The Ecology of Commerce by Paul Hawken. He will convince you that sustainable business is the only way to do business.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I think it's difficult because a lot of people don't inherently give value to our environment when really it should be like way up there at the top. And we can kind of, maybe your profits aren't necessarily going up super high, but you're benefiting the environment. And in the end, that benefits everyone. So we do only have a few more minutes left, but I'd love to sort of ask you guys, for the aspiring climate entrepreneurs in the audience, what's your advice to them in starting their business? What mistakes do you wish you could have avoided? Maybe Fayeann, do you want to start?
Sure. So I'd say, first of all, there is no handbook or playbook for starting your business. And something that might work for one person or one industry might not work for another. And you should see that as a good thing because it means that there are possibilities abound. So in my case, I found my niche. I recognized a need that was not being met in the solar industry and became an expert at it. And this just happened while I was having a conversation with a friend as we were driving down the West Side Highway one evening. And in the midst of the conversation, inspiration struck. It was not an easy road from there to where we are now, but it certainly helped that we had a niche and that we were able, it kind of honed our focus as well, rather than trying to be all things in the solar industry. We are one very specific thing that we're very good at. Recognize that mistakes are inevitable. So don't fall victim to analysis paralysis and get stuck in indecision. Again, there's no playbook for this. So give it a shot. There's a quote that I like that goes something like, it's bad for the mind to be part of unanimity. So dare to do something different. Even if you are being dissuaded by others, if you feel that it's something that you want to give a shot, go ahead. And I highly recommend how I built this podcast with Garry, in which he interviews now famous founders or founders of famously successful companies. And their stories are fascinating and will give you hope and possibly inspiration for your own entrepreneurial ventures. But what you will certainly learn is that many founders fail, or they didn't have the success at the time that or within the time frame that they expected it. But keep pressing on. And I believe somebody said that earlier, not even necessarily on this topic. Just keep pressing on, give it a shot.
Great. Garry?
Yeah, sure. Happy to comment on this. Again, probably could write a whole article about this. I think one thing I always say to founders that I'm privileged to speak with, is start and don't stop. I think one of the really, really hard things when you have maybe a job that you kind of love, or it's paying the bills, or you have all these dependencies and you really can't get to starting your business, my advice is write it down. Do a little bit more research. Just keep going and start it in your mind if you don't even start it in the actual corporate world, and then start it and just keep going. And you're gonna, I've been running Rheaply for 5.5 years, and I felt like last year during COVID, we finally got our stride, right? And I worked on it for 1.5 years before we ever launched. So I think there's this kind of starting fatigue or starting anxiety that founders just have to get out kind of over. And the other advice I think is so important is to talk with other founders. There's so much knowledge, so much therapy even, and just talking to people who try to do maybe, to Faye Ann's point, in a different market, in a different way, maybe had a different outcome, but sharing those stories so you don't make some of those same mistakes, so you don't talk to some of those same investors, or you're ready to talk to some of those same investors if you're fundraising. To me, it's just so invaluable. I literally have a block of time each 2-week period that I spend talking to founders who are 2-3 stages above me, just so I can just keep absorbing, keep learning. And it's also therapy. So I would say start, don't stop, and start your network with not investors, with founders.
Great advice. Christina?
Yeah, I would just say that it's a long journey, as Garry said, and I actually launched Pildora originally, started the company in 2018. So I was building the site for a really long time, and had some pivot moments. And so I think that's another point, is that be ready to pivot, be open. It's important to just move in flow in an organic way. I think always be open to learning, and reach out to people. Also, as Garry said, I think community is so important, because it can be really lonely to start a company, and so you feel so alone sometimes, and you just you when you connect with other founders, when you connect with community, you get such great advice, and you start to realize that, you know, you're not alone in those feelings, and that founder journey becomes a little less lonely and a little easier when you realize that you do have a community out there for you. So again, I would say like Clubhouse and even Instagram. I think don't be afraid to like reach out to people via DMs, because even if you think you're as many people that don't respond to you, there'll be people that do respond to you. And if you think, oh, this person would never respond to me, they probably will. And we'll be so happy to just set up a quick chat with you and talk. Lastly, I would just say really believe in yourself, and you'll talk to a lot of people. There'll be coaching happening, people with opinions. And at the end of the day, all these voices going on in your head of people's opinions, and you don't want to lose yourself. You don't want to lose your original thought. You know, you're the entrepreneur, you're the amazing person with the idea. So you are what makes the company. So don't lose that spark, and don't lose yourself in that journey. So just leave some time, some space to just reconnect yourself at the end of the day, at the end of the week, and to hear your own voice within you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think maybe this is like the first big discussion for our attendees, you know, speaking with amazing climate entrepreneurs. Chante, do you have anything to say about this?
Sure. Yeah, I think I'm coming from this with an operator and like an investor view, but also a founder. And so I think like I've jumped in a lot of different roles, and so have a lot of different perspectives. I think echoing what we've heard from the other panelists, like just starting, like you're never going to feel like you're qualified enough. You're never going to feel like you know it all, but like you just have to jump in. I saw a really good Twitter thread of founders just sharing how much they didn't know, and then fast forwarding 3 years later, like how much they grew their business. You're not going to know everything. I love the statement that, you know, no one knows everything, together we know a lot. So like, how do you think about who you can pull in to what you're building, so that you don't necessarily have to know everything, right? But you know everyone who knows all the things that you don't know. And I think that that is so critical. I think that's why, you know, hearing the other founders say mentorship, whether it's peer mentorship or mentorship from the industry or coaching, like there's so many great ways to think about how you can build your own skill set as a leader, because ultimately that's what you are as a founder. You're leading an idea, a vision, and then hopefully a team. I would say doing your market research, you know, coming from the side of like helping founders scale. Sometimes I'll talk to founders and they haven't necessarily done their full the full research around like who their market is, who their customer, like you need to know who your customer is before you start a business. It doesn't mean you need to know everything about your customer, but is there really a market need for what you're building? And so you don't want to go out there and build something that's like not actually needed, or maybe 10 years ago was proven in the market that it wasn't needed, right? And it still isn't. And so just making sure that you're giving yourself all of the knowledge that you need to know that what you're moving forward makes sense. And you can always pivot, but like making sure that you do that initial work up front, I think is so pivotal. I'll also add funding. I think there's so much craze around funding right now. And sometimes I think founders are so focused on like being a venture-backed company or scaling, you know, at X amount rate. I think knowing what you want your founder journey to be, like, do you want to sell your company? Do you want someone else to kick you out of your CEO position because they decide that you're no longer fit to grow your company, which is what happens in tech when you take equity and your ownership in your company goes down and down and down. And before you know it, your decision-making power isn't at what it was, right? And so is that the type of company you want to build? Or do you want to build a company where you are still 100% the owner and you're you know, bootstrapping, or you're building the company as you go, and maybe that takes more time, but you get to continue to own it. And then the last thing I'll say is delegating. I think as founders, and I'm saying this from my own personal experience, as things start to grow, we get really excited, and sometimes we don't recognize that we can't do it all anymore because we started doing it in the beginning. And so as you grow, recognizing that you can contract things out, that you can hire more people, that you can get part-time workers, so that you're taking some of the load off of yourself.
Great. Sandra, do you want to just say a few last words before we kind of close out?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say the worst that can happen is you fail. As long as you got a roof over your head and food on the table, think about it. What's so bad about failure? If your needs are met, failure is a gift in a lot of cases. So if that's stopping you, I would tell you to really look at that again. That's it for me.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us and kind of sharing your expertise. I really appreciate your forward-thinking solutions, and just you guys are genuinely an inspiration. So thank you guys so much. And just for our attendees, we'll be starting the next panel session in about 10 minutes, I believe. Yeah, thank you guys for speaking to me. It was great
Thank you
to meet
so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.